Hello, everyone. My name is Jay Berkowitz. I'm a risk control specialist with Interwest Insurance Services, and welcome to Distracted Driving, where today we're going to explore how distracted driving has become such a major problem on the roadway, some of the reasons why we drive distracted, and most importantly, what steps we can reasonably take to prevent ourselves and others from being distracted while driving. So the answer to the big question, why is this training important? You know, this is the question that I always ask myself when I sit down for a training like this and I'm going to dedicate an hour of my time to something. Why am I here? Why is this important? And for us, the answer is pretty glaring. Driving is the most dangerous task we do at work. It's the #1 cause for work-related injury and death. It's motor vehicle incidents. It's getting in the car at work. So for owners, having your employees get in the car at work, it's without a doubt your biggest liability. It's the thing that keeps us up at night. And for those of us in safety that ascribe to the philosophy that all injuries are preventable, and you know, this premise always inspires interesting debate, but in the world of distracted driving, we know for sure that literally all of these accidents and fatalities could have been prevented. They're completely unnecessary. We can definitely do better. With that said, distracted driving is now the leading cause of motor vehicle accidents. Nearly 80% of crashes were caused by distracted driving. 71% of truck accidents were caused by distracted driving. So today we're going to explore why and what we can do about it. All right, so for today's objectives, what is distracted driving? We will define this very clearly. How big of a problem does distracted driving present? We'll kind of dig into some of that data. Why do we drive distracted? We're going to take an interesting look at some of the issues and reasons why we drive distracted. How to eliminate these risky behaviors, and most importantly, what it's going to take for us to all go home safe to our families. All right, so what is distracted driving? Distracted driving is any activity that could divert a person's attention away from the primary task of driving. All distractions endanger driver, passenger, and bystander safety. One of the first things that we need to understand is that driving is complicated. In terms of the cognitive requirements and the neuroscience behind our ability to drive a vehicle, it's much more complicated than we think. We tend to take this task really for granted, and we do it so easily now. But driving requires high-level brain power. In addition to processing large amounts of visual information, street signs, other drivers, road conditions, etc., drivers also have to predict and react to what other drivers are doing and coordinate hand activity on the steering wheel with foot activity on the gas, brake, clutch, etc. Any distraction decreases the brain's ability to handle these essential functions for driving. So stations, playing with the radio, anything like that is an added cognitive stress to the brain and will really reduce our ability to perform those essential driving functions. When we talk about distracted driving or just distractions, it's helpful sometimes to think about distraction in 3 different categories. So we call them the big 3. We have visual distractions, where we physically will take our eyes off the road. If we're looking at a cell phone or looking at a street sign or just taking in the sights, where we're taking our eyes off of the road in front of us. The second one is a manual distraction, where we're going to take our hands off the wheel. We've all seen those folks in traffic. They're grooming themselves. They're eating a hamburger. They're, doing all kinds of interesting things and trying to drive one-handed or no-handed, right, where their hands are not on the wheel. And then the third, and this is the one I think that gets the least amount of attention, is cognitive distractions, where we're taking our mind off of driving. Either we're having some kind of a conversation, or we might be daydreaming, or texting or answering questions, or whatever it is. I know for me personally that the cognitive distractions are much more powerful in many instances than I even realize. So those are kind of the three kinds of distractions that we're going to dig into today. And we're going to pay particular attention to cognitive distractions as it relates to driving distracted. So within the context of those three types of distraction, here's just a few examples of distractions that we commonly see other drivers or even ourselves doing on the road. Texting or using a cell phone or smartphone in some way, talking on a cell phone even though it's hands-free, eating, drinking, talking to passengers, reading. I've actually seen people read books on the road, having maps out and trying to look at maps. I'm aging myself here, of course. Using the navigation system, watching videos, all of these things, we have either seen drivers do or we've personally done them. But these are good examples of the kinds of distractions that typically will happen on the road. All right, we're going to shift gears here a little bit, and let's explore how big the problem of distracted driving is within the United States. And there's some pretty sobering statistics. In 2018 alone, 2,841 people were killed in motor vehicle crashes involving distracted drivers. And this represents 8% of all fatal crashes. In addition to that, 400,000 people were injured in distraction-affected crashes in 2018. At any given time, an estimated 2% of all drivers on the road were visibly using a handheld device. What we know from research is that roughly 52% of drivers are distracted in some way while driving. On average, a non-fatal injury crash at work that involves distraction costs the employer $72,000. Right? The other issue is that distracted driving is also greatly underreported. So what we know is that 26 state reports lack the field to capture texting. That's not even an option for them to write on the report. 32 states lack fields to record hands-free cell phone use. So we know that these things are not being reported, and still, this is what, even with these underreported statistics, it still represents a really big problem. Now that we've covered how big of a problem distracted driving is in the United States, let's explore a little bit some of the reasons why we drive distracted, even despite the known statistics surrounding this issue. One of the issues is that there's a large group of drivers that don't fully appreciate the risk associated with distraction. In other words, they overestimate their abilities to drive while distracted and underestimate the risk associated with that task. And the next point, and a little bit tongue-in-cheek here, is the belief in magic, or really just the belief in the myth of multitasking. And we'll dig a little bit deeper into that later. The next is, just kind of the reward system of our brain, and what we do to escape boredom, and also really our need and desire to be productive, right? We're a culture that values productivity, and so much of the time it feels like such a giant waste of time sitting in a car, and there's a large group of people that really just want to try to figure out a way to take advantage of that time, and multitask, and being productive while driving is one way to do that. And then the last point is addiction, and really taking it to that level where we're calling it actual addiction, and we will dig into that. So the first reason of why we tend to drive distracted is not fully appreciating the risk, and hopefully some of the statistics that we've already covered about how big of a problem distracted driving is in the United States, that it's the #1 cause of motor vehicle accidents and has overtaken drunk driving and speeding and all of the other issues that we still continue to have on the roadway. Hopefully an understanding of those statistics and really understanding the risk associated with distracted driving will help curb that. But the second one is the myth of multitasking. And, in general, people are pretty poor judges of their own abilities. The belief in the ability to multitask is yet another example. Your brain doesn't multitask. It cannot do two things at the same time. What happens in reality is that your brain switches between two tasks, which then slows your reaction time. So even though we think that we're switching between two tasks very quickly, and it is pretty amazing what the brain can do, there is a noticeable slow in reaction time, though. Maybe not noticeable to us, but it is measurable, and it does reduce our performance. So for example, even talking hands-free on a cell phone while driving greatly reduces performance. There was a recent study that shows that people are distracted up to 27 seconds after they finish sending a voice text. Right? These are just some examples of not quite understanding the effect that trying to multitask has on our ability to perform the function of driving. I know for myself, I had a situation where I was engaged in a hands-free conversation with my mother, actually. I was on the roadway, and I got so engaged in my conversation, I missed my turn. So I had to go to the next turn, get off the freeway, turn around, come back. I was still on the phone. I was still engaged in my conversation, and I missed my turn again. I was so distracted. And I had to go to the next exit, get off, get back onto the freeway, come back and try to get on. And I kid you not, I missed my exit a third time. Right? It is amazing how, even though, hands-free, we really have this feeling that because we're talking hands-free that we're not distracted. And really the evidence does not support that conclusion. There's a lot of studies coming out right now that are really showing that even talking hands-free on a cell phone is a very dangerous proposition. Now, I just got done telling you a personal story of how distracted I was on a cell phone, even though I was hands-free. And what we know about hands-free cell phone conversations is that engaging in them makes a driver 4 times more likely to get into a crash. So one of the things that we need to think about is that as this data becomes more and more prevalent, what do we think states are going to do from a regulatory point of view? Are they going to ban cell phone use of all kinds in the car? And if they do, how are we going to respond as organizations, as employers, what policies, how are we going to respond to that? And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but as this data is starting to come in and become more popular and we're more aware of it, there's a really good chance that states will respond in kind.
So we're going to take a couple of minutes and watch this short video on multitasking, kind of some of the science behind it and how multitasking affects our performance. We'll watch that video and then we'll discuss a little bit about some of the things that we might have learned from this video.
Now, Dr. Strayer's taking Petrus back to the lab for the second part of the test, designed to give a concrete rating to his multitasking ability. And we'll give you a chance to play along too.
We have a driving simulator. I'll have you do some cognitive tasks while you're driving. People who claim to be supertaskers can do that cognitive task and drive without impairments to either the cognitive task or to driving. So, you want to try being
Absolutely.
a supertasker?
I'd like to see.
This test simulates conditions of driving while talking on the phone. Petrus will have 2 tasks to do while driving: solving a series of math problems while memorizing a list of words. The test is designed to be more demanding than an average phone conversation, so Dr. Strayer can track just how much Petrus's performance suffers at each task.
Excellent.
I'm going to ask you a series of math problems and give you a short word to remember after each problem. I'm going to ask you to recall all the words in the order that you heard them in. So, are you ready to begin?
Yes.
How about you? Want to give this one a try with Petrus? Obviously, you can't do the driving task, but try doing the math problems and memorizing the words. And we'll check in with you after to see how you did.
Is 8 times 4 plus 2 equal to 30?
No.
House. Is 9 times 3 minus 3 equal to 30?
No.
Mint. Is 4 divided by 1 plus 1 equal to 5?
Yes.
String. Recall.
House, mit, string.
Okay.
Get all those right? Here's another shot at it.
Is 3 divided by 1 minus 1 equal to 2?
Yes.
Ice. Is 2 times 2 plus 1 equal to 4?
No.
Owl. Is 9 times 2 plus 2 equal to 20?
Yes.
Toy. Recall.
Ice, skip, no. The last one was toy.
Okay.
Do you know the word Petrus couldn't remember? It was owl. But don't feel bad if you missed that one. This is an extremely difficult test, and you're not even driving while doing it.
Is 6 times 3 plus 4 equal to 22?
You're being forced to use different parts of your brain to accomplish each task.
Is 2 times 2...
The math problems require heavy use of this region, called the parietal lobe,
House,
while the memory tasks utilize your frontal lobe.
missed the last one.
On top of that, Petrus must use portions of his occipital lobe to deal with the visual and spatial input required to drive safely.
Turn right.
Often, these same regions are used when you talk on your cell phone while driving in a real car.
We now know that he's
With the test complete, Dr. Strayer is ready to give Petrus a concrete answer as to how he ranks as a multitasker.
Well, the good news is you're just like 98% of the rest of the people. You're like for driving performance, you got worse when you started to multitask, and the conversation task got worse when you're multitasking as well.
I think I'll put the cell phone a bit further away.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. It's been a most fun day.
Okay, good.
Despite Petrus's conviction that he is an efficient multitasker, his final scores turn out to be about average.
My confidence is absolutely shaken. I was surprised at how poor I fared on that.
So I thought the job at highlighting the conundrum or the current situation that we have in this belief of multitasking. And I think they did a very good job of laying out what the reality is that when we try to multitask, we're really just switching between tasks, and our ability to do so isn't as good as we think it is. And our performance in the tasks that we're switching between suffers. It takes more time, and we're just not as good at either task. So good little video highlighting that, and hopefully we can all stand behind the idea that multitasking is not something that we can be effective at when we are driving a vehicle, something that requires such an intense amount of cognition and coordination and processing of pretty complex information and motor patterns and all that. So thanks for watching that video, and we'll keep going here with the rest of the presentation.
So the big question to me is, what's changed? What has changed with distracted driving? People have been eating in their cars for a long time. People have been grooming themselves in their cars for a long time. People have been talking in their cars for a long time. So what is different? What has caused this massive upswing in distracted driving caused accidents? How many of you knew the answer to that question was smartphones? Right? In our culture, smartphone ownership has grown by 220%, even just in 2011 to 2017. I don't have updated information on smartphone ownership past 17, but we do have cell phone subscriptions even in that time. It really is astounding how ubiquitous cell phone subscriptions, smartphone ownership, in our culture, more people have them than don't, and it's not even close, right? So technology distractions on top of just having a smartphone and a cell phone subscription is that texting, there's been an increase over the last 10 years, a 10,000-fold increase in texting. 66% of drivers admit to talking on cell phones while driving. Newsflash, 55% of users get news alerts on their phone. So this idea of, it's not only that we talk on the phone, it's not only that we're texting, it's that we're receiving notifications, whether they're news notifications or social media notifications, messages coming in, posts that are made. The combination of all of that together is really an astounding impact on our culture. So, cell phones, cell phone ownership, smartphone ownership, social media, all of those are big problems. But how big of a deal is this? First of all, from a insurance point of view, if a driver is involved in a distraction crash, it's possible driver disqualification, right? And that could be a big deal for any of our clients, any of our businesses. But the next two stats here, to me, are the ones that really drove it home. Okay, recent research demonstrates drivers are 23.2 times more likely to be involved in an accident while texting than driving. 23 times more likely. Texting drivers took their eyes off the road for an average of 4.6 seconds. So kind of hold on to that time frame. We're going to kind of discuss that in the next slide or two. But 4.6 seconds, they're taking their eyes off the road. Right? Texting and driving makes you 6 times more likely to have an accident than a drunk driver. And when you think of all of the advertising and educational campaigns that have been put out over drunk driving, and this stat alone it's more than disturbing, right? This is a major problem for us, and as businesses, it is a big, big deal for us. So, cell phones, cell phone ownership, smartphone ownership, social media, all of those are big, big problems. But how big of a deal is this? First of all, from a insurance point of view, if a driver is involved in a distraction crash, it's possible driver disqualification, right? And that could be a big deal for any of our clients, any of our businesses. But the next two stats here, to me, are the ones that really drove it home. Okay, recent research demonstrates drivers are 23.2 times more likely to be involved in an accident while texting and driving. 23 times more likely. Texting drivers took their eyes off the road for an average of 4.6 seconds. So kind of hold on to that time frame. We're going to kind of discuss that in the next slide or two. But 4.6 seconds, they're taking their eyes off the road. Right? Texting and driving makes you 6 times more likely to have an accident than a drunk driver. And when you think of all of the advertising and educational campaigns that have been put out over drunk driving, and this stat alone it's more than disturbing, right? This is a major problem for us, and as businesses, it is a big, big deal for us. Now this slide here, when we drive without distractions at about 65 miles an hour, you only need about 30 yards to achieve a complete stop. But if we're texting while driving at 65 miles an hour, we need the length of an entire football field to achieve a complete stop. And remember that 4.6 seconds. So when we text and drive and we take our eyes off the road for almost 5 seconds, it's going to take us a full 100 yards or more to make a stop. So we can see from this billboard a little bit of dark humor. The consequences of distracted driving. And so at this point, hopefully it's pretty clear that distracted driving is a major, major problem on the roadways. It's been the cause of thousands and thousands of deaths and injuries at this point. And so now we're going to kind of shift into how to eliminate some of this behavior, or hopefully all of this behavior, in the workplace, personally, when we're driving, family, with our friends, with ourselves. So in this next part of the presentation, we're going to focus on how to eliminate some of the risky behaviors associated with distracted driving. And we're going to look at that through education, personal commitment, something called a commitment device, enforcing laws or company policies, incentives that might be in place, and preparation for driving and how that plays into the elimination of behavior. One of the most important steps in eliminating a behavior, an unwanted behavior, is education, training, and that's really what we're doing right now. The second step here that we're going to talk about is something called personal commitment, and there's been several of these sort of iterations of Take the Pledge out there by different organizations, and the pledges look a little bit different, and they have different bullet points, but really the idea is that each individual would take a personal pledge, an individual pledge to protect lives by never texting or talking on the phone while driving. That's a pretty bold statement. To also be a good passenger and speak out if the driver in my car is distracted. To encourage my friends, coworkers, and family to drive phone-free. Now notice that this pledge, this commitment, it's bold in that it's not talking about hands-free. It's really talking about phone-free. So that's an important step. And then the other is that, be a good passenger and speak out if the driver in my car is distracted. So imagine if you're fairly new on the job and your boss or your supervisor is driving distracted. How comfortable are you going to be? Would you call out your boss, right? Would you call out a supervisor? And so this is how things like company culture and people's level of comfort in being able to call out those that are in positions of authority. And something to talk about, something to communicate about within your organization, and really encourage each and every individual to speak out to anyone in the organization that is driving distracted.
So one of the tools that we have available to us in our efforts to mitigate or curb risky behavior when we're driving is the use of what we call a commitment device. And a commitment device is something that is really a recognition that at this moment we can recognize and say that engaging in distracted driving is dangerous, that we shouldn't do it. We all know it's wrong and all of those things, but we do know that at some point most of us will cave to the temptation to grab our phone, to make that phone call, to send that text, and that we really lack the willpower to do the right thing, even though we know it's the right thing, right? So a commitment device is a way that we can not have to rely on willpower to ensure that we don't engage in risky behavior. So an example would be, I know for myself that I'm as guilty as anyone at being tempted to use my phone when I'm on the road. And so what I've done to ensure that I don't engage in that behavior is when I get into the car, I put my phone in my backpack or my work bag in the back seat so that I can't reach it. I can't see it. I can't hear it. And out of sight, out of mind, it's my way of being able to ensure that I'm not just relying on willpower, so that in that moment, if I were to see that alert coming through or that text coming in or that phone call coming in, I'm not going to be tempted to answer the phone, to reply to that text, to look at that alert when I should be driving with full focus. So that's an example of a commitment device. There's many other ones out there, and we're going to cover a couple of them in really the use of technology. We have some really nice things, phone apps that are really designed to help us not have to rely on willpower alone.
So there are more examples of commitment devices in the form of apps, right? So this is ironically how we could use some technology to fight our addiction to technology. So there's some phone apps out there, for example, that you could program an autoresponder so that when you're driving, it knows you're driving, and when people send a text, they get an automatic message that says, I'll get back to you when I arrive at my destination, kind of a thing. And then you won't get a notification of a text. And then there's also phone apps with text blockers, right? So this is a way, for example, for parents to prevent their teens from texting while driving. And so there's other apps that are worth exploring that do similar things. And just another idea that what devices can we put in place to fight against our temptation to hop on those phones. So probably one of the easiest way to avoid distraction while driving is to take some steps before we drive, right? So if for example, we enter the destination and decide our route before we take off, we enter that stuff into our GPS, or if something changes and we need to enter in a new address, we pull over, right, if something's required along the way. That maybe we preset our radio station before we leave, or any music inputs or any other sound preferences you want, right? We adjust our seat to make sure that we're comfortable. We adjust our mirrors to minimize our blind spots. And, we do all of these things before we take off, right? So just a little bit of pre-planning goes a long way in reducing a lot of the distractions that come with driving. We want to make sure that we've done everything we can, because nobody wants to have this conversation with this mother. Right? This is a powerful campaign slogan used by the Utah Department of Public Safety. But I think for me it resonates, and hopefully for you it resonates, because we want to make sure that we've done everything in our power. What have we done from an educational point of view? What have we done from a training point of view? How are we communicating this priority to our employees? What policies have we implemented? How well are we enforcing our own policies? And all of those efforts combined can go a long ways in deterring or even eliminating this behavior altogether from your organization. And if you do that, you can sleep a lot better at night. As we've talked about throughout the presentation, if we could eliminate distracted driving from your organization, from your own personal behavior, family and friends, we would eliminate a lot of unnecessary crashes, a lot of unnecessary death, and a lot of unnecessary injuries. And that was really the goal of this presentation. And hopefully all of you have found one or two or more things that you can take back into your organization and implement tomorrow that would make a difference. So thanks for listening. We appreciate it, and be safe.